Here's a question. If I show you this champion, what role on Summoner's Rift do you think of? For the vast majority of League of Legends history, if you'd have said, well, that's Ashe, she's an AD carry, of course. What else could she be? You would have been absolutely right. But over the past year or so, Ashe has moved out from the traditional marksman role and is now more of a flex bot lane pick. And a pretty good one at that, being picked at Worlds quarterfinals in 2022 by Beryl, showing a positive win rate across high elo, and having her popularity in the support role explode over late season 12 and early 13. Why is it though one of League of Legends' oldest champions has found new success in this role now? Join me today as we look into the journey of League of Legends Frost Archer. This is Launch to Live, Ashe. You know, I bet if you made League of Legends, you would have made Ashe too. Well, not in a literal sense, as she is with her frosty Freljord theme, but some kind of archer or bow and arrow based character. It's an absolute classic theme to include in just about anything with RPG aspects. Just take a look around different gaming genres. MMOs have their hunter characters with bows and pets and ranged weapons. Battle royales or hero shooters often have a character with a bow, and a survival game just is not a survival game without tying some rope around a piece of wood and making your first makeshift bow. For League of Legends, there's now officially 24 different champions you can categorize as an ADC, or a bot laner, or a marksman, or whatever we're calling them nowadays. We have the hyper carries, the people who if they reach 6 items are expected to clean up teamfights in a matter of seconds, such as Cog, Twitch, or Vayne. There's AD casters who pack a punch with both autos and abilities, your Lucian, Corki, and Ezreals, and snipers that present a threat from half a screen away, such as Kate, Jhin, or a late game Tristana. So where does Ashe fit into this mix? At 6 items, she chunks health bars, but not as much as other people can, and while she has a good 600 base attack range, that's only 50 less than Caitlyn, she's much more reliant on kiting and chasing back and forth with her frost shot, rather than just outranging everyone. What Ashe has always been great at is utility, applying pressure with her volley, tracking the enemy jungler with her hawk shot, and making those huge cross-map plays with her ultimate. You could almost call her a support AD carry, which is a bit of an oxymoron. Why would you have a supporting AD instead of, I don't know, just a support? Okay, maybe we're getting a bit of ahead of ourselves here, because whilst Ashe support has become somewhat of a trend recently, it's not been the go-to way to play the Frost Archer for most of League's history. Ashe, to the surprise of no one, was one of the very first champions considered for League by Riot. You may even have expected her to be the original AD carry champion with her relatable archer type design, but Sivir was in development just before she was. All the same, Ashe was in what Riot Ginsu calls the second set of 6 champions, with her earliest official release date being one of 17 champions who were tested during Alpha Week 2 on the 21st of February 2009. As for where Ashe was played in the early days of Summoner's Rift, well, things varied quite a bit back then. At the outset, there was no set meta of a generally tanky bruiser top, an AP or AD carry mid, and a support and marksman bot. The only thing that was really quite consistent were junglers, but even then the champion pool of those capable of clearing the jungle relatively safely was really small. In fact, prior to the first World Championship, it wasn't uncommon for players to run Ashe or marksman in general as a solo top lane or mid. After all, this role required a ton of time and items to really power up. Why not leave them on a lane where they can just farm away happily and then have them come and join in team fights and objectives later on? But when the meta started to settle, players began to see the advantage of running an AD bot. It allowed for another person to take on a purely supportive role, proximity to contest second red side blue buff as well as dragon, and most of all to be able to more safely farm up your core items as opposed to working on your own vision for safety as other laners had to do. The early days of League and how much the meta shifted over time could be a whole other video though, believe me. What Ashe was also used for eventually on League of Legends launch later that year on the 27th of October 2009 was the basic tutorial, aka the Proving Grounds. Remember how loads of games had some kind of archer type character? It made so much sense for Ashe to be League of Legends representative to get the player used to some of the game's more basic mechanics. Myself being somebody who had previously played a lot of RuneScape and Hunter later on World of Warcraft, this made for a good familiar crossover into this new genre, and whilst there was a more advanced tutorial which actually explained in a fairly good way how the game is supposed to be played, the basic tutorial that Ashe was used for was a thing of nightmares. You could probably get an AI to put something together that's a bit more cohesive than this. Starting off on Ashe, it has you run to a few different points on the map, level up your abilities, practice using summoner spells such as heal and... is that revive? That summoner spell that was disabled from Summoner's Rift in Season 4 and removed from the game in Season 5? Revive did exactly what you would expect it to do, though surprisingly having an entire summoner spell planned around dying was not all that popular, despite what Scion mains may tell you these days. Anyways, after dispatching your minion-y assailants, it then has you recall back to the base and buy Thornmail first item on Ashe. Why is this in the recommended list, Riot? Wait, I see why they've done it. A few moments later, they want you to 1v1 Master Yi by face tanking his damage. Quite the relatable scenario in ranked, I'm sure you'll agree. Not far after though, and many reminders later to
stay behind your minions.
You destroy the enemy nexus and are pretty much good to go for the real game now, I think. As for Ashe's original champion design, I think the best way to put it is that it's familiar but a little bit different. Over the years, Ashe was given both a minor ability rework as well as a total visual overhaul. Her old passive all the way up to the rework was Focus. When not attacking, it gave you a stacking critical strike chance buff that would be consumed the first time you hit an enemy. That is it. One crit after not attacking for a while. Imagine not even being able to res your teammates as a passive on an ability. That'd be silly though, wouldn't it? Ashe's Q was what felt like her core champion ability, Frost Shot. Toggle this on to spend mana with each shot in order to apply a slow. You can still see this on her champion spotlight Riot did alongside her visual rework. They haven't updated it to match her new abilities yet, and they've only had a bit over a decade, so I'm sure they're going to get round to it soon. It'll be on the to-do list. Her W has always been Volley. It's changed damage-wise, its range, firing more or less shots, but it's still very similar. Her E used to be an entirely passive ability called Plentiful Bounty. It would passively cause you to gain extra gold for kills. At its most powerful version, it was a passive 10 gold per kill at max rank, which was not half bad considering that in the early days of League of Legends, the game was much slower paced, meaning that extra income would have time to stack up and be turned into items. During Season 1, this ability was changed into Hawkshot. It still gave gold but had been nerfed down to 5 at max rank for understandable reasons, but now allowed you to fire off a bird to do some valuable scouting. And her ultimate, whilst receiving all kinds of numerical changes over the years, has remained very true to its original state, firing a massive crystal arrow with infinite distance which applies a stun which scales with how far it's travelled. On the 23rd of May 2012, Ashe was set to receive a full facelift alongside her skins and splash arts getting brand new designs. She was among one of the first champions to get a full visual rework, which at the time made her look a clear step above many other champions' appearances. These days her base skin and some of her older ones have started to fall behind a bit again on design. I mean, have you seen the Wild Rift version of Ashe in comparison? It's a lot better. Then again, back then when Ashe did get her update, Scion still looked like this. In the looks department, he was suffering about as much as this gameplay. 3 years later, on May 14th, 2015, Ashe's gameplay update drops. This will be the set of changes to bring her a lot closer to the champion we know today. Her passive was changed from Focus, the ability that just gave you one extra crit occasionally, into Frost Shot, which was formerly her Q, though this initial version underwent quite a few changes. At first, it just made it so attacks always dealt damage as if they were crits against targets which Ashe had slowed. Not full damage crits, mind you, but an amount that scaled with how much crit percentage Ashe had. Later, a second effect was added onto her passive, Critical Slow. While she still gained extra damage against slowed targets, her crits would now double the value of her passive slow, up to 60%, decaying over 1 second, depending on her level. Her Q was changed into Ranger's Focus. After landing several attacks in a row, you could activate this ability to gain extra damage and attack speed. This was a steroid ability Ashe had been sorely missing. Her W Volley, as mentioned earlier, more or less the same it's always been. Hawkshot had its passive gold generation removed, but could now store 2 charges, and her ultimate remains the iconic enchanted crystal arrow, firing off a huge arrow with infinite distance that slows and stuns. These ability changes, alongside some new items which we will talk about later, are both huge contributing factors towards Ashe Support finding herself rapidly rising in popularity. But this is much more of a recent thing, because before we get into that, I want to look at how Ashe has performed at Worlds over the years. And to be honest, it's been a pretty rocky road for one of League's original marksmen. Looking through each World Championship, it's kind of like a chronology of the order marksmen were released in order for who was the most represented. Would you believe the season of League of Legends where Ashe has the most representation as a champion was Season 1, seeing a pick or ban in nearly 70% of games. On top of that, Ashe had a very impressive 86% win rate across the 15 games she was played in. The meta at this point for bot lane was essentially play safe and farm. Ashe, Corki and Misfortune were the most played in the AD role, and the supports, who were really just supports at this point in time, as in they were entirely reliant on gold per 5 items, were Janna, Sona, Taric and Alistar. Alistar was a hotly contested pick throughout the entire tournament though. He was played in support, mid and even jungle. People really liked the cow back then. I think there's a lot of reasons why Ashe saw so much success during the first World Championship. Nunu was the most contested jungler at the event, and back then he had access to Blood Boil. This would give an ally a huge buff to movement speed, attack speed and ability power. It was a steroid that Ashe would have otherwise been missing from her kit. Her E at this point in time, Hawkshot, still gave a bonus 5 gold per minion kill passively at max rank. Games lasted considerably longer at this point in time, and it even took a while to get out of lanes and into the mid game. Ashe just farming up was getting ahead without having to do anything special, and biggest of all, it was likely just a comfort pick. That's always been a go-to across so many different world championships. Go to what you know how to play well. The Archer class, as we've covered, is an essential cross-genre character. It's no surprise that Ashe was popular in League of Legends too. Also, champions released at an insane pace in 2011 during the first Worlds. There would be something new practically every couple of weeks. The meta didn't have a chance to fully settle, and if we were to go back with how the game is played now, I bet an entirely different meta would be optimized in no time. I mean, in Season 1 Worlds, for example, EU kept bringing out Rumble as a pick, which was super popular on their ladder, and NA just didn't really play this champion on their ladder and didn't know how to deal with him, so they ended up just banning it for the remainder of the event. Either way, Ashe was both the most represented and overall the best bot laner of the first Worlds ever. And then for the next, well, 9 years in a row, Ashe was not picked all that much at Worlds. During Season 2, she wasn't picked or banned even once. Season 3 comes along and Ashe saw 6 appearances, whilst Caitlyn, Corki and Ezreal made up the bulk of games played. Season 4, 0 games played. And though Ashe wasn't one of the meta AD carry picks, during Worlds 2016, arguably one of the most recognisable Enchanted Crystal Arrow plays was made in a super close semi-final game. 2 titans of League of Legends were facing off against one another, SKT and Rox Tigers, and it was 32 minutes into a game with cross-map kills flying in everywhere when this happened. Rox Tigers' Prey, Kuro and Smeb were pushing towards SKT's Nexus, with 2 members of the opposing team defending. SKT's top, Duke on the Echo, was missing from the fight, but in the distance, Prey made an amazing guess for where he would stop to recall, just out of the vision of his minions. Unfortunately for Duke, he cancelled his recall and started his teleport after seeing how much pressure the Nexus was under, only for this devastating arrow to still land, cancelling not only the summoner spell, but his return to base. This huge play was absolutely the difference maker and allowed Rox Tigers to even up the score at the end of an insane match, as well as giving Ashe players around the world a moment to remember and be proud of. But this crazy play was a rare sight for players to pull off, and even rarer for viewers to see. This trend would continue onwards too. In both 2017 and 18, Ashe was picked once in each tournament, turning up just 1 win and 1 loss. It wasn't common to see the Frost Archer picked in competitive play anymore, and it hadn't been for such a long time. Here's some words during one of the times she was picked in 2017 from Free.
And honestly, like, Ashe isn't even that standard of a pick anymore, right? The strategy that everyone is picking, that everyone thinks is the best composition, is these Triss, the Twistanas, the Kog'Maws, the Zais, right? These hyper carries, the multi-target, long range, high burst, and Ashe is almost an afterthought in this sort of phase of League of Legends right now.
And that was very much the state of affairs, and it had been for a long time. Whether it was the pros valuing the late game hyper carries such as Kog or Vayne, or the dueling power and burst of AD casters such as Corki or Lucian, the bot lane just didn't need a utility pick. There are 4 other people on the map for a reason, and somebody needs to be pushing out enough damage to whittle down their tank line. This was all after Ashe's mini rework ability-wise, keep in mind. It hadn't significantly modified her pick rates in pro play at all. What Ashe needed was some kind of perfect storm to happen, for a meta where a utility bot lane shined. Eventually, in Worlds 2020, it did. This Worlds event was a tale of 3 marksmen, Senna, Jhin, and Ashe. For Ashe in particular, she had quietly been receiving minor buff after minor buff as her play rate still wasn't super high prior to this season, including her mana cost lowered, cooldowns lowered, and frost shot slow increased, auto attack reset on ranger's focus, and many more. And as these buffs stacked up, Ashe began to rise to prominence. There was also a noticeable bug fix to Runan's Hurricane on the same patch. Blade of the Ruined King into Runan's Hurricane was one of the top item builds used by Damwon's AD Ghost. Not only did Ashe have a great standard utility, she could slow multiple people through Runan's extra attacks, and Blade of the Ruined King would stack on top of this, making her into a machine gun of damage and utility. And this was what the meta called for at the time. Season 10 was definitely one of ups and downs for the marksman mains, with the rate of the game's pacing having been upped quite a bit. It was feeling tough to get out of lane and transition to mid-game with any meaningful level of power from items, but it was in this environment that Ashe's kit found some of the highest level of use that it had ever done. Ashe already had good damage, but she could do a lot more than just damage. She had always been able to do so. This faster pacing of the game opened up space for a League of Legends where a utility AD was valued. Ashe also made for a good engage tool with her Enchanted Crystal Arrow and a soft counter to the 2 other most popular bot lane ADs at the time, Senna and Jhin, both immobile carries who could get picked by an arrow if they're out of position, with Jin's ult literally rooting himself in position and Senna having both longer than average attack and casting animations. Overall at Worlds 2020, Ashe was picked or banned in 60% of games and was a very meta bot laner. Unfortunately, this brief moment of glory was not to last too long for the Frost Archer, as at Worlds 2021 she dropped back into the background, only seeing 1 pick throughout the entire tournament. World Season 12 in 2022 was a similar story. Ashe had a few picks here and there, nothing too significant, other than one thing. One player decided to bring out Ashe in a whole different light. It wasn't the first time that this pick had been done in pro play, but in a quarter-final match with everything on the line, DRX support Beryl brought out the Ashe Support.
Oh, we weren't far off!
This was a quarter-final match DRX had to win versus EDG to remain in the tournament. The stakes could not have been higher, and it was here that they relied on this seemingly strange pick. Now, Support, I think, has a bit of a history during Worlds for players bringing out things which nobody really has a clue whether they're any good, and they've probably barely played against them before. It's one of my favourite moments at Worlds, actually, when a player locks in something that's seemingly random, only for it to turn out to be a perfect counter to the meta or a core part of a unique strategy developed for a multi-game series. In 2013, Royal Club's Tabe kept locking in the Annie Support to the confusion of many, when for the longest time she'd only ever been considered a mid laner. In 2016, Rox's Gorilla locked in a support misfortune during the semi-finals versus SKT. Talk about hiding a pick. In fact, it was support misfortune alongside Ashe. Casters and viewers alike had kind of no idea what was about to go down, with a few words even being thrown in for considering the likes of an Ashe support.
Support Ashe sucks. And support MF is great, right? That surprisingly works. I wonder if he's...
So why Ashe now, in a game that meant so much? Well, she had two big things going for her that made it the perfect moment for the Frost Archer to enter the support role. A huge number of champion buffs leading up to the 12th World Championship, as well as recent new items that complemented her kit so well. The buffs she got are insane reading them back. 12.4 and 5 saw two huge buffs to her ultimate, one of them increasing its speed the further that it travels, and the second reducing its cooldown at rank 1 by a whole 20 seconds. 12.18 saw a bump in power to the attack speed steroid on Ranger's focus, definitely more of an AD Ashe benefit, but support Ashe can be a huge lane bully early, so it's not even that bad either. But perhaps the single biggest buff was in 12.10. So as you'll know, League of Legends is updated very often compared to many other games. Riot makes small adjustments here and there. Just changing single-digit numbers can be the difference between a champion entering the meta and being considered a below-average pick. So when you see an early game stat change which is this massive, you already know they're pushing for the champion to go into the spotlight. I mean, base health 640 up from 570, on top of a big health growth increase, armor growth increase, and an MR growth increase was more than doubled. But wait, there's more. In fact, there is a lot more to break down here. The Mastery rework, which had already been in the game for some time, allowed her to pick up Cheap Shot for extra burst and Bounty Hunter to lower her ultimate cooldown even more. Hail of Blades, because come on, who takes Comet, helps Ashe take very aggressive trades early and apply a near unbeatable amount of pressure thanks to her long attack range and slows from her passive Frost Shot. And then we get to the itemization, Boots of Lucidity for more ability haste, and then some more recent additions to the game, Umbral Glaive for damage, more haste, and the passive ability to clear wards. And perhaps most importantly, Imperial Mandate, further lowering her cooldowns, improving damage, and adding a unique effect, Coordinated Fire, meaning immobilizing abilities deal extra damage and apply a mark which an ally can proc for even more damage and move speed for both players. It's as if Riot made the perfect item just for support Ashe. With all these things going for her, heading into Season 13, it's no wonder that Ashe began to gain a huge amount of traction in the support role, and that support role was starting to become her identity now, instead of an AD carry. And though we're still a while off Worlds this year, looking at different regions' winter or spring splits showed a story that Ashe Support was perhaps the most important pick in the entire game at the highest levels of play. During the LEC Winter Groups 2023, Ashe saw a 100% pick ban ratio across 24 games. 21 of those were bans, by the way. LCK Spring 2023 had Ashe once again as the most represented champion with a 95% pick ban ratio. 175 of those were bans. The ongoing LCS Spring Season stats originally had Ashe as the most contested champion in the game when I first checked out the stats, but she has dropped in popularity a little bit. Still, as of doing this, she's near enough a 75% pick ban so far, but we'll get into why she's dropped off during an ongoing season in a moment. On top of those impressive competitive stats, Ashe has seen a huge surge in popularity in ranked solo queue as well, becoming the most played support globally over the past few months in Plat or above, as well as sustaining a positive win rate for players in that elo range. It turns out when you can play insanely aggressive in lane, have access to great vision tools through spamming her Hawk Shot, and making cross-map ulti plays more or less once per minute, that's a pretty fun combo, and a pretty powerful one at that. And if we look at the highest ranked players at Challenger, she's still up there with the most games played and an even better win rate, nearing 55%. Ashe Support wasn't just some off-meta pick or cheesing a lane, it was a real support, and statistically, for a period, the best one in the entire game. But you don't get away with a near 100% pick ban in pro play, as well as being the most popular solo queue champion, without some kind of eventual kickback. It was pretty clear that through all the buffs, the amazing itemization, and how oppressive she was to play against, that something was going to have to change. A Reddit thread that Freak replied to showed early thoughts for toning down Ashe in the support role, including reining in her early game health pool, increasing AD ratios, moving the cooldown on her W up late game, as well as taking Enchanted Crystal Arrow back to a 100-second cooldown at rank 1. Perhaps most interestingly was that they were, for a time at least, considering dropping the stacking requirement on her Q, meaning it was just going to be a straight up press the button attack speed steroid, kind of like Tristana's rapid fire. This probably would have made her into even more of a lane bully thanks to Hail of Blades, despite it also helping AD Ashe by giving her a button to press that gave instant value. Freak also gave some context as to why they felt the need to nerf Ashe support. He says there's two main things. He doesn't think Ashe is a problem for solo queue and players are having fun with Ashe support, and that's fine, but she is too dominant in pro play. I'd feel differently if she was around 70% presence with some picks and bans, but she's trending towards 100% ban. Though we don't even see her in pro play, she's just attacks on bans instead, though she has to be nerfed enough to change pro behavior. He goes on to say, I want to push hard enough that they will actually consider her counterable. She's supposed to be natively weak into champions like Leona, Nautilus or Pike, since she can't protect either herself or her allies from being chain CC'd and killed, but she has one of the highest base healths in the entire game. It didn't take too long after for patch 13.5 to come around with the changes that were decided upon. Ranger's focus ended up keeping its stacking mechanic, but now has a longer duration, a small nerf to volley, and biggest of all for support Ashe, her Enchanted Crystal Arrow moved back from an 80-second cooldown at rank 1 to 100, undoing that huge buff she got early on in Season 12. Patch 13.6 came out soon after, further rebuffing Ashe's AD identity following the nerfs. The message was clear, Ashe support had gone too far, and becoming a ban tax in pro play will have some kind of effect in follow-up nerfs. As for the results of the nerfs, they have come in pretty fast. As we saw with the LCS, Ashe has rapidly dropped in popularity in the support role, and in solo queue it's a similar story in Plat Plus, going from the most played support in the game to dropping down more than a dozen places in popularity, with Ashe's win rate taking a similar hit, dipping well below the 50 mark. You'd hope that her marksman identity would be getting a push as a side effect of the other related buffs, but we seem to be falling back to Ashe's original problem, the unique and difficult spot of being a marksman centered around a supportive toolkit. And I think it's not Riot doesn't want her to be capable of performing in multiple roles as a flexible bot laner, but when a champion starts to roam outside of one single role, it can become a little bit, well, problematic. Remember when Pike started to be played top lane, amongst other things? Ashe isn't on that level, that is for sure, but it makes the job of balancing a champion within a game with who knows how many combinations of items, champions, masteries, and so on that much more difficult. From what we've seen so far though, the nerfs have certainly done their job. Perhaps Ashe support is one of those picks that just struggles to be in a healthy place, where it's either underwhelming or the most obnoxious thing in the game. I call this the Callista effect. And whilst Ashe's marksman identity has been the most long-running way to play her, you just have to wonder following the nerfs if and when she will find herself back on top of either roles as one of League of Legends' first ranged carries. And that is the story of Ashe, the Frost Archer, so far. Definitely one of the champions I played a lot when I started the game, and one with such a relatable theme across so many different game genres. It's really interesting to see how one of League's oldest champions has gained an entirely new identity over time. Not the first time it's happened in the support role, that's for sure, and there are many reasons for that in of itself. In fact, talking about how supports went from stacking gold per 5 items and having to buy Oracle's Elixir, to today where they can do so much more than just impact vision and act as CC or heal bots, would be a really interesting video to make. Either way, let me know your thoughts on the video on Ashe and how she's evolved, and do you think she can work as a dual role character in a healthy way, or should Riot focus into niching her down a little bit more? And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in. I'll see you all in the next one very soon.